Hey, Susan Ragsdale with Right Creations Group, and today I am here with,
Mark Davis. I'm an artist and I teach English here in Roanoke, Virginia.
and we were already pre-chatting, and I said, I got to hit record because right now we were talking about how to be the best version of yourself. And at the moment, Mark, I am working on what I'm kind of calling great group leaders.
Mhm.
And the very first section is all about being the best version of yourself. So you were sharing thoughts about that. Why is that important to you?
I
And
think it's really important to have a realistic perception of what the best you can be. In an age with mass communication, where I get to see everything from all over the world, it's really hard to judge with my monkey brain. It's hard to figure out how good I am at something. If I only compare myself as a singer to Pavarotti, and I only compare myself as a dancer to whatever blonde person's going to be on Saturday Night Live this week, I may think I don't have many skills at all. But originally, when we were becoming people in the savannas of Africa, we ran around in a gross. It takes about 144 people to have enough skills that everything gets passed down, because we have to live long enough for grandmothers to show us how to do things, right?
right.
Everybody gets skills. And with more people than that, you can't collect enough berries and nuts and little pieces of meat to keep everyone fed. So what I think is important is realize in a group of 144, each of us probably has several incredible skills and gifts. Some of them are going to be natural. I'm the optimist. I'm going to bring everybody up, right? And my neighbor is the realist and is going to bring everybody down to maybe there's not a 10 million blackberries right over this hill, right?
Right.
Each of us is going to be best at making a fishnet or dancing when it rains. But in a modern world, we're bringing these kids up to compare themselves to Britney Spears and Mozart and Cornel West. Compare yourself to your neighborhood. Look at a gross of people. If I grabbed 144 people randomly off the street, do you grow the best tomato? Are you the best storyteller? Do you really organize people well? And out of that group, if you are even the second or third best at something, that's an incredible human gift, right?
So one of the things I hear you saying that translates into language we use is, like, in our trainings, we try to help people figure out what their spark is, what their passion is. We all are born with this thing that
Mhm.
when we do it, we feel alive, we're joyful, we can spend a lot of time, 2 hours can go by and we're like, wow, that felt like 10 minutes. And so that's our spark. It gives us energy. It also gives us purpose. Um, what is hearing that, how's that resonate with you, or thinking about your own life or what you're teaching with young people?
Well, what it reminds me of is two recent deaths. Recently, John Lewis died, and there were a lot of news stories about his last crossing of the bridge
Right.
and a lot of how he affected people. But at the same time, locally, I was seeing multiple news stories about an elderly man who hung out at a local diner. And he had recently passed, and they interviewed dozens of people who said this man was a light in their everyday. If they were having a hard day, they could always drop by, and he'd have something to say about the weather and something good to say about them. And it's right back to gross theory. These two people had an effect. And I never got to shake John Lewis's hand. I'm sure the legislation he passed affected me somehow. But I know the dude at the diner. I didn't know I knew him. I was in once. He said nice things to me. It sunk into my head. I've always got that great treasured gift of this incredible interaction with this one man. We all have that ability to have a spark. If you help a single neighbor, if you make something prettier, if you just keep your own lawn mowed, right? If you just sweep the sidewalk in front of your house, you're making this incredible contribution. If you do what if everybody did it, it's a great standard. My father pressed this on me when I was young. Sometimes we feel the need towards selfish action. And he'd always say, would it be okay if everybody acted like you? It turns out there's a guy named Immanuel Kant who got into more complex levels of that. But my dad's version sunk into me. Would it be okay if everyone threw a hissy fit right now? Right? And what I started judging was, would the world be a better place if everybody did this good thing I do? Well, I grow maters and hand them out. I grow potatoes and hand them out. I think if everybody grew a little of everything, maybe it's a fresh cut flower. Maybe you just let the honeysuckle come up in your yard. Every decision we make is our spark. We're making decisions about who we are. You will always be what you're right now becoming.
So the way it's really funny because you're fitting nicely with the way I'm talking about this in the book. I'm having, how do you lead self with
Mhm.
others in the world? And if you decide you just want to be the best version of yourself possible, I'm going to live a life of peace. I'm
Mhm.
going to try to be love to everyone I interact with. And that's your focus, that's fine. If you want to use your spark and your influence more in the community and with neighbors and ripple it on out, it's really just a matter of expansion. So how far do you want your spark to impact the world, your leadership to impact the world? I hear a little bit of that reflected in what you're saying, in doing tomatoes and sharing tomatoes, or whatever, so some of us get hooked on causes that we care about and we go all in for that. So we start the hero's journey, if you will,
Yes.
to do something bigger. But before we take that, we have to band with others. And before that, you have to know, what's my spark? What do I love? What am I good at? What am I passionate about? Go ahead.
Yeah. It's when we've been taught a lot of this about object permanence. If you take an object and put it in front of a toddler, a young baby, they will look at it, but if you hide it from them, it quits existing. Well, we have person permanence too. We're all going to quit existing at some point. And if you live a normal lifespan and have an average number of children, about 100 years after you're dead, no one's going to know anything about you. Unless you're exceptional, unless you invent the steam engine or shoot a bunch of people, it's 100 or 150 years. I, I don't have kids. Mine's going to be even shorter, right? But I think I know what people are going to remember about me. That's the guy who left paintings out in public. That's the guy who brought me tomatoes. That's the guy who shoveled my walk because he already had his shovel out. Uh, that's who I want to be remembered as. That's bigger than I'll ever be. What we put out into the world and how we affect others has much more effect than we can ever directly. If I gave you a shovel and you started digging, and someone beside you is nice to people or mean to people, you're never going to make a hole as big as that nice to people or mean to people is. How we ripple out into the world, if we stop and make it a conscious decision, we become the most powerful people we can be. That's the power I want.
So is that something that you're intentional about passing on to your students?
I think it's incredibly important. One of the things you have to learn first, people think as an artist, the first thing you learn is about chemicals or about paint or about paintbrushes. And what I say is realize that it's like saying a sentence and walking out of the room, and that sentence hangs in the air forever. You're affecting people. Everything you say has a message, whether you mean to or not. And it especially applies outside of art students to my English students, picking your words carefully. And we have to go over even the unintentional. Sometimes the intentional use of language can be harsher or be mellowed because of a cultural difference. But little things that even like pronunciation can make a huge difference in how we're approached by people. I have students from South America who say, I need to get back to the cholera. And I'm like, well, that's adorable, but it's going to form a bias against you in some people immediately, right? So we try and beat those things back. Putting forward our best self has to remember that other people have biases and imbalances. They're not our fault, but we have to deal with it.
So I want to back up a little bit. You started out as an artist first and then became an educator. Is that
Yes, ma'am.
correct?
Yes, ma'am. I started out as an artist, and a friend of mine was working in a group of home with developmentally disabled boys. And I started hanging out with one of them and teaching him pottery. And it's just been a downhill slide into education ever since.
So that was sort of like you had the spark and passion for art, and then you discovered, I have even more gifts inside of me and I can share this love. Is that a fair?
I think the spark that came from art explains 90% of my life. It's what got me talking to people. Now I get invited to do public speaking. It's what gets me going to groups. It's what got me into education. I wanted other people to have this incredible power. Imagine being the first man to harness fire. You want to go around and show everyone. I feel that way about red, orange, yellow, and blue, right?
Mm, yeah,
I want to
yeah.
give everyone this incredible spark and power. It's an amazing tool to communicate, and it's a great way to find out about yourself. It is this core of everything for me. I'm like a bad football fan, but with color and shape and light.
So let's talk a little bit about that, because I agree that creativity is just it's such an essential I don't even know what word to use. It's an essential tool. It's something that gets you out of your head
It's a
and more into your
requirement.
heart. It's a requirement.
It's a requirement. If you just get shelter and food and water and a little companionship, you're not done. I need help. I don't get through average days well. I'm an incredibly anxious person. I'm very hypered. My father would say I was too wired for color TV. And when you have a kid like that, you can either beat them into submission or keep them busy. And my parents chose to keep me busy. And it turned out that all it took to keep me busy was paper, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Just keep it coming. And I formed, I think, a large part of my identity around this urge I had to do. By the time I was 13, I was stealing kindling wood from my father to build little boats, write words on them, and put them into the Ohio River. And I could get by on that feeling for days. There's a sense of accomplishment, there's communication with others, and it also feels a little, for some people who are anxious like I am, you sometimes want to shut yourself off from all the input, the sensory input. And it felt like I had more balance if I was creating this thing that kept talking for me when I left.
So I can resonate with that. Besides writing books, which is one thing, the other thing that's a new love in my life is doing stained glass and mosaics.
Yes.
And and I've done some art, I've tried painting and stuff, and that was fun, but there's something about stained glass mosaics, the colors and the whole process that's very meditative, very peaceful. You're very present and in the moment. So I can relate to what you're saying. And I want to ask, for those who are listening to us, what are some tips you have for including more art into the classroom or the after school program, so it can be used for therapy, it can use to create an experience and still get across a lesson or whatever. So what are some of your tips from what you've done naturally, probably?
I think the key was hidden in part of your question there. You were talking about you were doing stained glass and you loved the process. The process of art speaks to the age it was made in. It speaks to the culture it was made in, and it speaks to the people who made it. So if you want to discuss the revolution, the American Revolutionary period in a classroom, I'd like to come in and show you how linen was made and how they poured lead. And if you want
Mhm.
to talk about Romans, I want to show you how they made lead pipes and how they made oil lamps. I've got an oil lamp 3 feet from me that's Roman. Uh, Art fits into every other lesson we have because culture, mindset, and understanding affects technology, which affects art. And each culture, each mindset, each technological understanding changes and defines how we look at eras and how we look at people. And that's looking at how they made their art matters. The fact that the Last Supper was done in wet plaster in a hurry on a wall
Mhm.
speaks very much. You couldn't sit back and reflect. You had to slap color up there. But I think the most powerful lessons in art come from long process. You talked about you like both stained glass and mosaic, and it makes me giggle because I'm a sucker for any art form that has too many steps. I like to make pottery. I want to make cheese. It takes 9 months to make a block of cheese, and I want to do it. I'm a sucker for anything with too many steps. I found out that I didn't like photography anymore when I didn't have to go in a dark room. I think
Ah.
following the steps through on something in a small project is a tiny metaphor for life. It's what we're doing. We're following the rules and following the steps for a desired outcome. There's a concept called sloyd, and it's used a lot in Scandinavia. And it says that if you give a few years of craft training to almost anyone, they get better at everything else. Much like we show music training increases math scores,
Mhm.
right? If I give you a block of wood and expect you to turn it into a spoon, and you get a year to keep trying until you get a good spoon, that lesson will extend to all things. You become a better chemistry student, you become a kinder person. You look at every other person in your life and go, maybe they're struggling, because I can remember when I threw that piece of wood against the wall and my thumbs were bleeding. Failure, failure makes us bigger people. And conquering art means you have to experience failure and overcome it.
I was gonna say, when we first jumped on, I was mentioning I was working on an activity of words, definitions of failure and success, but I was also introducing experiment, because
Yes,
that is what you learn in art. It's
this is just me figuring out what happens when you put watercolor in salt water yesterday. I've got stacks of them here. Experiment should be rewarded, right?
And that's the better word for failure, I think,
Yes.
because failure, it's too much of a tendency. The educational theory that's about growth mindset and fixed mindset. And if you're like, oh, you're so smart, that's the fixed mindset. And I'm guilty of being one of those kids who grew up under that kind of mindset. And so getting into stained glass and mosaic with my friend and her teaching me, she introduced the word experiment into my vocabulary in a way that I wish I had had when I was growing up, to not feel like I'm supposed to be this smart or whatever. But failure leads to success, and it really is an experiment. And the emphasis on, you just keep learning and trying until you get what you want. I have a little a stained glass bird, sun catcher hanging up, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, if I were to do that again, I would do this, this, and this. I will totally love and appreciate what I've done, but I know what I would do next time.
That's not just the art lesson, that's the life lesson.
Right, it is. It's the
It's,
leadership lesson.
that's everything. That's everything. And I was told when I was young, and I still believe, you don't really understand a thing until you can tell someone else how to do it. Unless I can get it across to you. And now I'm not sure this applies to high energy physics, right? I try to keep up with what Stephen Hawking says. I always find the first 30 minutes is great, then he just starts babbling. But with our basic tasks, with our everyday task, it's very important, right? This has worked last time. There was a great lesson I saw recently. Some monkeys were in a cage, and there was a very tall fence with electricity on the top. And they learned to pull back a branch, build up the potential energy, hold up and fling themselves out of the cage. That's how smart primates are. Now, once all the monkeys were out, they just shook some peanuts and they ran right back into the cage. And that's who we all are. I relate so much to that group of monkeys. I have a brilliant solution, and I'm a constant screw up. And so often in educational environments and corporate environments, we look at a person and say, they're not right, instead of saying, they're not right for this task. I was working once where I was to manage a group of men who worked in a warehouse. And I came out back to bring a message to one of them. And he was attempting with a forklift to turn a barrel 360 degrees. Rocket banging against the wall. And I stood there watching, and my supervisor came out and said, why aren't you stopping them? I'm like, look at what he can do, right? I want him moving whatever I need moved. They're practicing, right? And he saw it as failure and play. But play, which we've learned to associate with art in the Western world, we don't take art very seriously. We think it's a play thing, right? Yeah. And it can be, but it's not for everyone. It's also healing. It's spiritual. It's meditative, right? It's how we figure out who we are. You can make artwork and not do well at it and be a better person at the end. When I used to teach art history on the college level, I always took a boom box with me and I hid it behind the desk. And I'd be going through slides and I'd show them Renaissance art. They would nod their head, and they'd see the Egyptians and nod their head, and they'd see the Impressionists and nod their head. And somewhere in the early 1900s, someone said, that's not art. There'd be a Franz Klein, which is just black brushstrokes. And they'd say, that's not art. And I'd pull my boombox out and turn on the music. And I would jump up and I would just shake it, right? And I said, what am I doing? And they'd say, you're dancing. And I said, am I good at it? And they're like, oh, no, you're not good at it. Right? I said, but it's still dancing, right? If I cook you a meal and it's not very good, I'm still a cook, right? And if I make art and it's bad art, it's still art, right? And that's what matters. Somebody did that. Somebody experienced that. Somebody thought that. And I hope they came out the other side a better person, better than they do from experiencing, for instance, my dancing. Right? This ability to make mistakes, to explore, is innately human. No matter what angle you come at us from, what separates us is our creativity, our art. Elephants will gather around a dead elephant and do things that look very much like mourning. People make tools, religion, tool use, experimentation. These aren't solely relegated to people. They're all over the place. But we learn from mistakes. We learn from mistakes and we juxtapose ideas. Juxtaposing ideas or paring away ideas is what creativity is. That's why it's such a powerful tool.
Man, we've talked about leadership. We've talked about success and failure. We've talked about creativity. We're packing a lot in here. I think this is sort of like we're doing random following the trail here for student. I mean, but it's fun. It's for students and for adults. Um, I think it's really important right now for their own well-being to get involved in art, whether that's journaling, whether it's gardening. Um, you use the word play. For me, when I am following my spark and my passion, it feels like play, even though it is work, even though that stained glass piece took months to do because I can only do 2 hours a day or whatever. And it is a long process. Every step, even the frustrating steps, felt like play. And I think that's one of the gifts that art gives back to us. But right now I'm thinking in the year 2020, everyone is impacted in some degree by something going on in the world right now. So some people are reassessing their careers or their vocations. Maybe they were forced to do so, or
Mhm.
they just are because they are working from home and have extra time. Um, and I'm trying to formulate how I want to ask it. So I guess I'm saying if I were giving gifts to people, I would want them to know what their spark is, what their purpose is, and I would want them to focus on well-being. And I think creativity is a tool for both of those. I think you can get very clear on what you're about when you're in the midst of a project. Is
You
it?
know, a foot doesn't exist. We all got together and said, this is a foot, right?
Mhm.
Time is the same way. Time is one of those standards we just get together
Right,
and agree on.
right.
Find out what makes you disagree on time. Find out that thing that you can stare
Mm.
at and someone looks at you and says, what have you been doing for 2 hours? And you're like, no, it's been 7 minutes. Find the thing that makes you disagree on the standard of time and engage in that daily with a rigorous schedule. At 1 o'clock, I'm going to do this thing that makes me lose track of time, right? If you find that and cling to it, you'll be a better person because you will find better ways to do it. You will pare away the unnecessary. You will build on what makes it better. And that's what we're doing in all of life. We
Mhm.
are our own metaphor, right? Be your own metaphor.
And I would say be the author of your own life.
Same thing, same thing. Create. You can leave a mark without leaving a negative mark, right? Be it mater plants, make music, right?
Mhm.
Be an output machine. You are an output machine. Now, I can put very negative things out there. I can put very positive things out there. I try to put pretty things out there, right? And occasionally people give me money for it. Uh, uh, I have artwork that I make that I do not sell and I do not show. Sometimes it just comes out dark. It's how I work these things out of my system. It's my psychologist, it's my masseuse. I think you should find your psychologist and your masseuse too, no matter what it is.
So yeah, I think philosophically we're on the same page for a lot of things.
Yeah.
Every day we create, and we
Hmm.
get to create whether it's a good day or a bad day. We
Hmm.
get to create whether it's being the best version of ourselves or sharing tomatoes with a neighbor or
Hmm.
making an art piece for a friend
Hmm.
or calling someone and telling them here's the 5 things I appreciate about you. It's little
Hmm.
things. It doesn't have to be big, but we can also create justice movements and all sorts of things simply by our choices and actions. So knowing our spark is about creativity, it's about leadership, it's about making the world better. And I don't think we can say anything better than that. And don't be afraid to experiment and fail because that's how we grow and learn. Does that sum up our conversation?
Learn stuff, do stuff.
That's right. That's right.
Yes.
So, Mark, if people want to see your art, is there a place they can go to see your art?
Several. I've got pages on every social media platform where I operate under the name The Cursing Dog, as in a dog that would use harsh language. Uh, my dog just has a word balloon with Beetle Bailey curses, exclamation point, ampersand. I also, there's a page on Facebook called Lost Art Finders Keepers, where I create artworks and just go leave them in public with a photo. So whoever wants them can go
Hmm,
get them.
nice. Well, I hope you guys like this. I enjoyed the chat with Mark. Like, Please subscribe and share. We're trying to encourage each other and on our own personal development and growth and be the best version of ourselves and helping our young people grow. And so sharing is the best way to do that, because what Mark said may have inspired you more than anything you hear from my mouth. So thank you, Mark.
Good for having me in. You have a good day.
You too.